Welcome to EWA's FIN-LYT podcast. EWA is a fee-only RIA based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We hope all listeners of this podcast will benefit as we deep dive into complex financial topics that we will make simplified for you. And we hope that this really serves as a catalyst so that you can make the best financial planning decisions for your family and also save time. Welcome, everybody, on today's episode of FIN-LYT. Jamison and I are talking about something that we deal with our clients pretty much on a daily basis when we're onboarding new clients. Why do I make $1 million a year before taxes and also feel broke? And this is not something that's a one-off. This is a very common theme when we onboard a new client that has adjusted gross income above $1 million. And they just wonder, I make a lot of money. Why do I not feel like I have any money? So today we're going to break this down, and we're also going to talk about tips that you can actually implement to make sure your plan is on track, to make sure you have reduced stress, and to make sure that you do not feel broke, essentially. Because if you have $1 million of income, it's probably because of hard work, high discipline, high stress job. And so if anything, your financials should be reducing your stress and be working for you by life design. So let's break this down. So we came up with 3 examples because we work with all 3 of these: physicians, business owners, and then also executives. So Jamison, talk to us just about some common traits that you see in a physician that's making $1 million a year. What has typically happened for them to come into our office and say, I feel broke?
Yeah. I think a couple of things to understand is if you're making $1 million a year, that's before taxes, but just how tax brackets work, anything above like 690 is going to get hit at 37% plus state and local taxes. So much more of your income is getting hit at these high tax brackets, which it's really easy to be like, well, I'm making $1 million, but like my after-tax income is much lower than I think it should be. And that's because majority of it's getting hit at the high tax rates. So from a physician standpoint specifically, it's basically, if you're making over $1 million a year as a physician, you're very specialized. You've done a ton of training. Generally, that's like a specialized surgeon or somebody that is super specialized. So you've gone through residency, fellowship, making $50,000, $60,000 a year. That could be 4 to 10 years, and then you sign your first contract. Probably not making $1 million your first contract, so maybe the first 3 or 4 years you're making $500,000, and then you see a huge income. Basically, see 2 big income jumps: one out of training, and then the next income jump is with that second contract. So it can happen all of a sudden, and then I would say the biggest reason is just lifestyle increase creeps up. There's a number of reasons why, but that would be the biggest thing, is just as your paycheck jumps, like doubles and triples, you immediately want to go buy the car, buy the house, do all of these things. And it's really, which we'll get into, kind of juggling and making sure that we prioritize all of those things.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on that. Thanks for breaking that down. So a physician has, just like anybody, typically 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school. So now we're at 8 years. And then if we're talking about a specialized non-surgeon, at least 3 years of internal medicine, probably another 3 years of fellowship to specialize. Maybe that's cardiology, gastroenterology, so be it. And so just adding the math there, that's 14 years of delayed earnings. I mean, during undergrad and resident, or during undergrad and medical school, you're making like literally nothing. And after that, maybe you're making between $50,000 to $75,000 a year. And that whole time, you're surrounded by attendings who are your mentors that are making a large amount of money, driving Porsches in nice cars. And, there's a saying, you become the average of the 5 people you surround yourself. So it's very tough to basically go over a decade seeing this amazing lifestyle while you're also working 80-hour weeks and not being able to see any of the financial benefit. It's very tough. So just from like a pure mental stability, like psychological perspective, there's a reason why, attending, you go from residency or fellowship, immediately go to your first attending job. And I can't tell you like how many doctors I've worked with during fellowship that then they call me and I say, let's meet before this goes up. And they say, let me get my first paycheck. And they literally blow it on, like, I'm thinking about a couple of clients. They went to like what's the store, the Kate Spade?
I don't know.
like $5,000 of purses. And we laughed. And now after that, she's on a good financial track. But this happens, and there's just having that realization is really important. And having a philosophy down before that happens is also really important as well.
A couple of things to add. Also, if you think about, like, by the time that you're through that, you're like 35 years old. And if your peers that you've gone through high school, college with, at 22, they're making money, not anywhere close to as much as the physician's going to make, but through that time, the people that are the same age as you are making money. They're buying things. If they're making more than $50,000 a year, they're buying things that you can't, and that's also hard psychologically, as well as being around all the attendings.
Totally. So let's break down like numbers. So if you're making $1 million a year, first, probably the little voice in your head is saying, I can afford pretty much anything, right? But in the reality is, $1 million a year, a couple of things that are going to happen. Your paychecks are going to be smaller in the first couple months until you hit the Social Security threshold. 6.2% of your paycheck is just getting ripped away. And then once you hit that max, which is probably, after the first 2 months, then it jumps up, which is confusing, and most people don't understand that. And then it's like this uneven cash flow. Then if you get a bonus, your employer probably messes up the withholding for the taxes on that. And then you have a big tax surprise at the end of the year. So just in Pennsylvania, for example, if you're making $1 million a year, depending if you're married or single, and what kind of deductions you have, in general, you're probably going to take home on average about $43,000 to $45,000 a month. So that's the first realization, is having a financial plan and looking at what much, because thinking I make $1 million versus the reality is you're going to have like maybe $550 of money you can actually spend. That's a huge, step that a lot of people don't understand. And then without a financial plan, we see that can go away so quickly. So, just thinking about clients that we've worked with that have come up to us after they already feel broke. Typically they're in a multi-million-dollar house, so maybe 10 or 15 a month is going away to a mortgage. They have their 3 kids in a private school. That's another 10 a month. So now half of their money is literally gone before we even bought groceries. And then we talk about, lifestyle. Typically they have 2 or 3 really nice cars. That's another $3,000 or $4,000 a month. And then typically their credit cards are fluctuating between $10,000 to $15,000 a month as well. So before you know it, like we're saying, hey, develop a financial plan, and we only have like $4,000 or $5,000 a month to work with, which isn't going to work to replicate a lifestyle that they're currently accustomed to. So having a financial plan before this happens is so much easier. And we're going to talk about 10 actual tips you can take away so this never doesn't happen to you and the lifestyle creep doesn't occur. But to undo that situation, there's typically, we have to have some serious conversations and really evaluate what's most important, because a lot of people the majority of America is not in a sweet spot of financial plan. There are people that are just over accumulating wealth and will have 10, 20, $30 million when they retire, but they'll only be used to spending $100,000 a year because they're out there splitting meals and doing, and then they're not going to know how to spend that money. So that's one paradox where it's like the best savers are the worst spenders. And then the opposite end of this, there's people that are spending everything and then never going to be financially secure and then working for the wrong reasons because they have to, they don't need to. So I would say there's probably statistically less than 10% of Americans in this income range are in the sweet spot where they have a really healthy balance. They're living their best, life by design now, but they're also securing the future. But it's not an over or under accumulation, and they're accumulating for reasons because they want flexibility and autonomy, not because they just want to suddenly retire. They just want optionality. And so having that reinforced in the context of a written financial plan is so important. But what other thoughts do you have on why this happens, and how do we help some clients get out of this?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is it's the psychology behind it of lifestyle creep and a lot of years of just deferred compensation, and then it finally hits. But how we help, the biggest thing is what we call reverse budgeting, and the term, I don't know if you came up with this, or I know you've used this for a long time, but the money temperature. It's basically like a thermostat of, let me just break this down. So if you're making $45 a month after taxes, we'll figure out what are the fixed expenses and savings. And that's going to be stuff that doesn't change every month. So mortgage, car payment, maybe school loans if they're still there, and then whatever we allocate towards savings for financial dependence, for kids' education, whatever that is. That's on the fixed side. And let's say that's 25 a month. So 25 of your $45,000 paychecks going into that account, it's automated every month. You're not even going to think about it. Now we know expenses and savings are taken care of, and then the remaining 20 a month would go, in this example, go to the spend account. And basically it's just monitoring that account each month. That's the only thing you have to track, the only thing you have to look at, and just making sure that account can be run down to zero. Now you don't have to regret or think about, can I afford this, can I not? It's whatever's in that account gets spent, and that's it. So the first thing would just be having what we call reverse budgeting, getting some structure around your cash flow, your expenses, your saving. And so a lot of times what we'll see is like you have one bank account or two bank accounts that all the bills are auto drafting out of. They don't even know how much those are, and then they're swiping a credit card. And so it's like just total chaos. That'd be the first thing. Anything to add?
Yeah, no, that's really good. So, I mean, I think the reality is, and this is a judgment-free zone, in our office, because we see this. So it's most people really make themselves feel like very shameful or guilty around finances, and so then they just continue the habits. And so I think the reality is everyone has a definition of their life by design that's different. So our job is to just educate. And there has to be some structure in making sure they're not making any mistakes. But then it's up for their, decision making on figuring out what's most important.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to enjoy life more where their kids are under their roof. Statistically, 80% of the time with your kids is spent before they're age 18. Then once they're out of the house, you're going to see them, but they start their own family. So you got to enjoy that time when your kids are under your roof. I think that's the biggest regret of billionaires is that, they didn't spend the first 5 years really with their kids. So. And then in today's society, unless you have a financial plan, and there's do-it-yourselfers that can do this, but I think whether you have a financial plan or you do-it-yourselfers, the key factor for success is intentionality and tracking. Because if you don't, society and what you listen to, what you watch, what your friends, it will lead into subconsciously decision making. And most people are living on this hedonic treadmill where they're very stressed, they're very unhappy. The anxiety and depression are all times high after COVID. And they think stuff is going to fix that. And so then they get a new car, and then 3 months later, it didn't fix anything in their life. And so that process continues with a bigger, better house, a bigger, better car, bigger, better tools. Amazon, you can literally click a button, and stuff arrives at your door the next day. So, and all of that's great and fine, but how much of that decision-making is done with intentionality? And so I think the biggest thing to remove decision fatigue, because, I'm just going to rewind myself as an example. 10 years ago, I was working with a coach, and this was kind of like a life coach, super, super helpful, but it was basically like, let's get into, what do you want your life to look like, do a vision exercise, a life wheel, and all these things. And it started out to like a morning routine, and I was having trouble getting up. And so I would hit snooze like 3 or 4 times, and before you know, I was scrambling. At that time, prior broker-dealer, we had to be in at 7:30 a.m. for meetings I thought were not a good use of time. So it was just kind of like a bad attitude to get out of bed. But then I would miss working out, I'd miss journaling, I'd miss reading, I'd miss meditating and doing all these things. And so what that coach told me is that let's set up an exercise to remove the decision fatigue. So at that point, there was Keurigs didn't exist. At least I couldn't afford one. And so I had a coffee pot. And so I would program my coffee pot for 5:35 a.m. And the night before, she said, you have to leave the coffee pot off the coffee maker. So unless you get out of bed and get down to the kitchen and put the coffee pot on the coffee maker, at 5:35 a.m., that machine's going to start and it's going to spill and ruin your counter. And so next morning, 5:30 a.m., instead of hitting snooze all the way to like 6:15 a.m., I had to get out of bed. I didn't have a decision other than, because I don't want, my counters to be ruined, there'd be a huge mess. So the decision, instead of having 1,000 decisions, is do I work out? Do I do this? It was one decision. It was program that coffee pot. So that's really what reverse budgeting in a financial plan can do. And so I would say, in order, if you want to have a quick recipe for success, it's reverse budget. So you can, automate everything from a fixed perspective and then also from a savings perspective for college and retirement. The second thing would be, from a savings perspective, really get clear on what you're saving for and automate it. And then the only decision, so this comes down to 3 things: reverse budgeting, automate savings as part of the reverse budgeting, and the third thing is just spend everything else guilt-free. Mm-hmm. Because then instead of wondering if you have money or justification of, I have all this money and it all being intermixed and spread out, you know what you have left. It's in a separate account, and you can live your best life within the confines of that coffee pot that you just set up. So now one decision has just eliminated thousands of decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's super important because a lot of people we see they'll track every dollar they've spent on an Excel sheet. And that creates so much more stress because you're looking at it every single day. Should I buy this? Should I not buy this? And it's like, well, we could calibrate this once or twice a year and say, okay, what's the spending? Here's any added expenses. Is our money in our variable account too high, too low? And it's just one or two decisions per year, and totally agree with everything you just said.
Yeah, no question. So let's move on to some examples of executives and business owners. So which one do you want to tackle next?
Let's do business owners because
Okay. So business owners that making $1 million a year, typically if like a family-owned business, small business, why do they feel broke? Because you think a business owner is very savvy financially, strategy. They're managing probably multiple employees, et cetera. So what are some things that creep up that make a business owner making $1 million a year also feel broke?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think there's always a paradox of like, do you reinvest money back into the business to make it grow? Do you hire a new employee? Do you buy a software, or do you like take it out for yourself? So that never goes away. And so that would be one thing. And then the other thing, just industries vary so much. I mean, a business could be gone tomorrow, and literally any business could just go away. So that is just fluctuating. And the other thing is taxes. A lot of business owners, they're so caught up day to day on what they're doing in the business. And it's, just total chaos most of the time. Your business, to me, a lot of it is just like problem solving. Every day there's a new problem to do. And so you're dealing with all that stuff. And if you don't have the internal systems and processes within the business to like automate a lot of that, you'll be doing all that stuff. So you'll have no idea what a lot of business owners we talk to, they don't even know what their profits are. Like they just never look at their finances. They just know I have enough money to pay my bills. So when you do that, you forget a lot. If you don't know, how much is actually going to be like taxable income, there could be, stuff that flows through your personal tax return. So taxes always creep up that you're not anticipating if you're not proactive about it. There could be unexpected tax bills. So I think there's a number of things, but business owners can be the most variable because there's like all of these things that pop up in the business every single day.
Yeah. So let's talk about like just a normal industry. So like, let's think small business owner, say team of 20, $10 million of revenue, which most people say, oh, that's so much money. Probably like a 10% margin, right? So the business owner, let's say they're paying themselves $100,000 a year, and there's 10% profit. That's $1 million a year. So first of all, taxes. Like right off the bat, if you're making $1 million a year, you're probably going to like set aside $100 per quarter in estimated taxes. Because if that's profit and that's not running through payroll, and you're saving some FICA taxes through an S corporation, that $1 million profit, like 400 of that has to go to taxes because you being the sole business owner, that tax liability all flows through you as a 100% owner of that S corp. That's 100 a year, and if you don't mentally set that aside or actually make those payments, most people will have blown through that $1 million of profit, and then they're $400,000 behind in taxes. That's just a crazy example, but so make sure that you understand in detail your accounting system. And that's not something that you can fully you delegate it, but you need to understand on a high level from a cash flow perspective to know what's yours and what's the government's when payroll taxes aren't being automated for you. Secondly, is guess whose responsibility is if the market changes? Like if you're on a $10 million revenue and the market changes and you want to keep all your employees and suddenly you're at $8 million of revenue, most likely that doesn't mean you're at $800,000 profit. That 10% margin is probably slid down to like a 2 or 3% margin because you still have your employees, you still have your tech costs, you still have your rent or your building cost. None of that stuff goes away. Those profits really show up at scale, and if the business or the economy changes, who's responsible to keep the business afloat? It's you. So it's a paradox, like you mentioned, Jamison, because the best businesses, the best returns will be reinvesting in the business, which will eliminate tax liability, which will keep the business going. But if you put all your eggs in that basket and you have 1 year of fluctuation, like in COVID, a lot of businesses got wiped out. So I believe it's your responsibility, even though it may not be the best investment, you need to have a good personal financial plan in place as a business owner because your best asset is your business. So everything you do should be a support system to save or keep things going, because 1 or 2 bad years doesn't mean you have a bad business. It just means the economy and factors changed.
Yeah.
So those are the reasons I think starting to realize and not saying, oh, I'm going to just eventually sell my business. If you want to get a good sale in your business, you have the responsibility to make sure the business is healthy and thriving from a financial culture, and many things that go into that. And so I always heard, as a business owner, you have really 3 duties, right? So you have to do what's in the best interest of your clients or customers at all times. You have to do the best interest of your team members at all times, and you should make every decision that's also in the best interest of the company. So nowhere did I say as a business owner anything's in the best interest of you. That's where I think a lot of business owners get caught up. But what's in the best interest of your team members is if you, the owner, are mentally stable and sane. Having a good financial plan will drastically help that. Also, what will help the company is making sure the person that's literally, financially backing the company is able to do so. Again, so, be selfish and get a financial plan in place. And then also, for your team members, because they're relying on you for a paycheck, and the only reason they're going to get a paycheck is if your business is surviving. So, great examples from the business owner, but it's even a bit more difficult as a business owner from a cash flow perspective. It's not only the money temperature can affect. As a physician, it's probably you're going to make $1 million consistently if you're over that. Like if you're a neurosurgeon as a business owner, you could make $1 million one year, $200,000 the next year, $2 million the next year, $300. So it's just all over the place. So the money temperature could really change really quickly.
A lot of conversation. I guess one way to help fix this with business owners is we'll say, let's figure out what do you need to live your life and save enough, and maybe that's $100,000 a year. Let's make sure that's coming in no matter what, that this is secure. Then anything above that, then we have the conversation around, do you save it? Do you reinvest it? And that way, that generally alleviates a lot of stress, because then it's okay, at least I know my basic expenses and lifestyle is covered. And obviously, if lifestyle is super high, then that fluctuates back to how much you need to take from the business, et cetera. But that's, I think, a great example. So what are the third one? Let's talk about executives.
So typically at a Fortune 100 company we see in Pittsburgh, probably making between $1 to $2 million a year. Let's say for the sake of this podcast, let's call it $1 million a year. So how does that compensation work, and what problems typically arise?
So this is an interesting one, because they may have a base salary of $300,000 or even less, and then there could be some cash bonuses, and then generally a lot of the compensation is through stock, restricted stock units or stock options. And so a couple of things happen. Number one, the base salary is coming in, and that's not if it's 300, you're 14 or 15,000 a month after taxes. So you're used to living on that smaller number, but psychologically you're well, my gross income's $1 million, that something's not adding up. So you say, okay, I'm relying now on the stock, the cash bonuses. So what happens then, the cash bonuses could vary. So same thing as the business owner, if that industry is fluctuating, the executives are the first people to generally, make less money. And so the third component, that could fluctuate. The third component is the stock. The stock generally is, if they're restricted stock units, those are getting hit at high tax rates. There's a ton of taxes. A lot of times those withholdings are going to be all messed up, because they may be withholding for that $300,000 base salary when gross income's $1 million with all of this. So now you have a tax liability. So I guess as we're talking through this, it is a similar example of the business owner situation, just on a different situation. But the other thing too with executives, I think it's super high stress, extremely high stress. You could be told, hey, tomorrow you got to get on a jet and go over to Asia. Okay, I have to do that. You may be in a hotel room 200 days of the year. And so that causes, kind of like you said, when you do have the time to spend money, you want to, enjoy it and actually spend money, do the things like that, do things that make you happy. So if there's no structure or organization in it, a lot of the same things can happen where you have no idea how much you should be spending. There's all these things that vary, and it's very easy to make a lot of $1 million a year and not feel like you have any of it. So anything to add on that?
Yeah, no. Fortune 500 companies are smart. If you're an executive, they can't really afford to lose you. So they base typically 30 to 50% of your compensation in these restricted stock. And the way these works is, if you're making a $300,000 base, a $300,000 cash bonus, you've pretty much eaten up all the small, mid, and even now anything on the stock, like Jamison said before, anything above 690 is going to get at 37. So That stock, the way it works is you don't get taxed on it when it goes to you, because it typically vests 3 years later. Because the company has a golden handcuff and they don't want you to leave. They want you to realize if you leave company A for company B, you're leaving millions of dollars on the table because the stock's not vested. So typically they give it to you every year, but it vests every 3 years. So at any point, after an executive has been in their position for over 3 years, you have 3 years worth of RSUs, restricted stock units, that are just not vested. And so when they do vest, that's when they're taxed at ordinary income rates. So if you have $1 million of stock vested, typically they'll withhold, some low number, like 24% of it, $240,000 of tax, but you're going to owe $370,000 of tax. So right away, okay, most people don't realize that's $130,000 of cash I'm going to owe the government at the end of the year that I didn't plan for, just because there was an HR withholding mistake. So a good financial plan obviously can forecast this in advance and lay it all out there. So the reality is that having a good financial plan and realizing how my compensation works, when am I going to be able to use the money, see the money, how the tax is going to work, then can allow you to take control from that voice in your head, which is basically going to say, I make $1 million a year, I can afford this car, this house, send my kids to college, and all these things, when the reality is maybe you can, but if you rely on the fact that you make $1 million a year, it's going to drastically fail you without having a financial plan that actually supports the reality of how your cash flow works and the reality of how taxes work and the reality of what is actually yours.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, I think those are great overviews of physicians, business owners, executives. Let's talk about some of the tips we had. So the first one would be stress test on the house purchase. So I think it's important to have some basic rules. We'll use house and car, for example. We did a blog on this and have some video content, but making sure that you don't go house poor, there's two stress tests we like to use. The first one would be making sure housing costs are less than 30% of your take-home income. So for example, we use the beginning. If take-home pay is $45,000 a month, 30% of that would be $15,000. So that would include mortgage, taxes, insurance, whatever cost would go into the house. Keep it under that 30%.
The third of that would be, so technically it would be $13,500. I'm a nerd.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, the reality is that's about a $2 million house max, depending on where you live with, because like principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, so 30% of 45 would be $13,500. You need to fit your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and even factor maintenance into those costs. So really, under today's interest rate environment, at max, that's probably a $1.8 to $2 million house.
Yeah.
Anything above that, you're wondering why you feel house poor? That's why. But that also fits within stress number 2, and we always recommend look at both stress tests with the house. What's stress test number 2?
Don't borrow more than 2 times gross income. So this is where interest rates can have a huge factor in.
And 2 times gross income is what? 2 million,
yeah.
right? And I just said 1.8 to 2 million. So those are really important to look at. Make sure your house purchase fits under both of those stress tests, because those take into consideration changing market conditions, et cetera. And then also we have plenty of advice on, you should not be purchasing a house because of investment. It's not. Maintenance, insurance, taxes will eat up. Make sure that it's a lifestyle decision, so it's not a justification process of spending a lot thinking it's an investment when it's not, because if you need to sell that thing, a $2 million house is going to cost you, like $120,000 minimum in a commission to a real estate agent just to unwind it.
Yeah.
And so if the market drops and you're paying the commission, you could be a couple $100,000 behind. Time solves usually all these problems. So as long as you're in a job you like, the job likes you, you have a minimum time frame of 7 years, and you follow those true stress tests on the houses, 30% of take-home pay, and also the 2X rule, typically you're going to be good. That's a great one. So
one other thing to add, test for, so basically house and car are the 2 things that is very easy to go poor on.
yeah, so what's the stress test for the car?
Under 10%, and that would include car payment, maintenance, gas, insurance, all of that. Keep it under 10%, and then a whole nother conversation about buying versus leasing. But regardless of which one you choose, keeping under 10% will keep you.
So at $45,000 a month of take home, make your car payments under $4,500 a month.
Yeah.
So if you have a Porsche, a Lamborghini, a Mercedes, and those are each $2,000 a month, you're well over.
Yeah.
At $4,500 a month, I'm just thinking about into my Lincoln lease a couple years. It wasn't that too far ago. It was $300 a month because I negotiated the heck out of it. But obviously that I couldn't get that now. Car prices have increased.
Yeah.
But okay, so we're gonna get, this is 10 tips, by the way. So 10 tips of, if you follow this, there's I want to say a high probability that you will not feel, if you make $1 million a year, if you follow these tips, you will not feel broke. And you'll have significant reduction in stress. So number 1 was around the house and car. Number 2 is just around saving. So just as a general rule of thumb, between all savings for short-term goals, the next 5 years, midterm goals, which should be like a college or maybe a vacation house, college for kids, undergrad, post-grad, and then also for financial independence. We hate using the word retirement because most people making over $1 million a year, they have a lot of identity and meaning in what they do. So we just want to have a financial plan that's a support system. So as soon as possible, they can do it because they want to, not because they have to, and get off that treadmill of having to work and being in a situation they don't like, and the hedonic treadmill of keeping up with the material possessions and just getting time back and being able to trade time for money, or money for time, or time for money. I mean, everyone's doing that every day. So just as a general rule of thumb, what percentage should $1 million income earner be saving for short, mid, and long-term goals?
I would say generally 25% of gross income will get you there. This could vary because there's...
So $250 a year, so 25% of $1 million. So you should be saving $20 a month.
Yeah.
And so typically out of that $45 a month, we've already factored out your max, not your 401k with a match. That's probably $2,000 or $3,000 a month. And then, maybe an HSA. So I would say typically most of our $1 million income clients, after we've gotten the financial plan and calibrated this, they're saving automatically, when you add everything up together, about $20,000 a month.
I do want to say that those are like good general rule of thumbs, but it's so specific to, like we had talked about earlier, you may want to, like we have clients that they're saving enough for long-term financial independence, which may not be 25%, maybe less. And they may say like, well, we'll help with college, but we don't need to pay for 8 years at a private school. So we want to spend more now on vacations, on things. So it can fluctuate, and that's why you should have a plan specific to your goals and your values.
The crazy thing though is, here's the reality: the less you save, it becomes a paradox, because then you need to replicate a higher income, a higher lifestyle. It's actually having that balance of saying, okay, make 45 a month, I'm going to spend 25 between my fixed expenses, and I'm going to save 20 a month. Fixed and variable spend, I'm going to save 20 a month. That's a good balance. But if you say, no, I don't want to do that, I'm going to spend 30 a month, now you have to replicate a higher lifestyle. And so just as a quick aside, like, yeah, your kids will be out of the house when you retire. Yes, your house will be paid off. But when you retire, like, you're going to have more time.
Yeah.
And you're going to have a completely shift in your identity, figuring out, what do I want to do? Who am I outside of work? Basically half my day was at work. Now half my day is, I don't know. And typically when you fill up activities that are meaningful in time and adventures and travel and hobbies, you're going to spend more money on other categories than you were where you're working. So, the typical rule of thumb, we've seen like 60% of income or 80% of income. Those are very individual based. I would just say, look at, if you're $1 million income earner making $45,000 a month and you're saving 20 a month,
you'll be okay.
You'll be okay. But like, you need to replicate probably out of that 25, at least 20 of that 25, because yes, kids and your mortgage will be out. So maybe you could say, oh, we could spend 15 a month. That's just not realistic for, hundreds of clients we've helped retire.
Yeah.
You're going to need to replicate at least 20 a month in that example of after tax income. Adjust that for inflation, 20 years from now will be like 40,000 a month. So it's very surprising that you do need to have a healthy balance of saving, and saving is the best thing you can do to control your money temperature as well.
Yeah, totally. Couldn't agree more.
All right, so that brings us to number 3. So Jamison, tell us about the general rules of thumb for bonus compensation. How much is going to go to tax, and then out of what's left, how much do we recommend could be spent for fun, and how much should be saved?
So high income earner making $1 million a year, or over $1 million, we'll round up and say 50% is going to go to taxes after federal, state, local, depending on how the income is.
So let's real quick, Pennsylvania, break it down. 37 federal, 3.07% state, Medicare taxes, and then also, you're in a surcharge of the Medicare tax plus local taxes. And the only thing that's not a factor there is Social Security tax. So generally it is going to be, doing some quick math, like 44 to 45%. So we're going to round up to 50% because there's some states with higher state taxes. Okay, so you get let's just use an example. You get a $300,000 gross bonus, and you're saying 150 out the door in taxes. Probably only 100 of that got actually taken away from taxes. Another 50 of what you has to go to taxes.
Yeah.
So now you have 150 left sitting in your bank account. What do you do with that?
Half can be saved, half can be spent generally.
And when you spend it, it's important that that doesn't increase ongoing lifestyle.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a one-time project on your house. Maybe that's a big vacation. Maybe that's a big experience. Maybe that's saving to put on a down payment to a lifestyle vacation house. But there's also a money temperature that can creep up with bonuses. I want to make sure is avoided.
Yeah.
So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4 is, and this is an important one. We're not therapists. A lot of what we do feels like therapy, though, which is, great because we have really meaningful, deep conversations with our clients. But tell us about the values exercise and how that can be an impactful way for meaningful change, not only in financial behaviors, but also in general state of happiness and just being present in day to day.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most, in my opinion, impactful things that we can do with clients, because a lot of times you're just not having these conversations. So the values exercise, we call it, is we will. It's funny, one of the clients that I talked to said that was when you made me look at a bunch of words and pick what was like important. I was like, yeah, basically that's what it is. So we have a deck of cards of these values, maybe health or family or faith or whatever it is, and they have to narrow it down. There's a process that we go through to get down to what is the 5 most important. And so we use that as a guardrail for decision-making processes, because a lot of people's financial plans do not support their lifestyle, and they're saving for no reason and there's no intentionality behind it, or they're spending and not saving enough. Maybe early financial independence is important and they're spending everything, or vice versa. Like they don't care about saving, they'll work forever and they're, not. Anyway, it can get totally out of balance. But the values exercise, super helpful, because then that helps. I'll use an example. If health is one of my values personally. So for me, I have no problem spending money on things that will help my health. So going to a trainer or making sure I eat healthy, things for my mental health, and that I don't even have to think about it. I'll spend the money on that. Whereas if I didn't care about health and I'm going, spending money on those things, it's like, why are you doing that? So I think the biggest thing is just create some intentionality in your spending and making sure that you can make those choices based on what is most valuable to you.
No question. Just for listeners out there that aren't our clients and want to do this exercise themselves, Google 50 top values. Anything from family, friends, meaningful activities, work, security, wealth. Those are all, just examples. Spirituality, whatever it is. Narrow it down, print them out, look at them, narrow it down to 5. Then rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. How present is this in my life on a scale of 1 to 10 right now? And then ask yourself, how can I get it to a 9 at least in the next year or 2? And then that becomes a framework for decision making. So I'll just give an example. A client recently, they want to buy a vacation house because family is so important for them. And they don't necessarily, it's not as important for them to fully fund graduate school. They want to do undergrad. So going through the financial plan, having those top 5 values and saying, will this decision help us move the needle towards getting to a 9 on those values, or will it take away? And in that case, it helped 4 of the 5 and it took 1 of them down, because wealth was 1, and that's not a way to grow wealth, is buying a vacation house typically, because they're not going to Airbnb it, they're not going to rent it out, it's just going to be for them. They're going to use it 1 week out of the month. So that allowed us to have a very meaningful, not just look at numbers in the spreadsheet and look at here's the impact, is it helped us have a very meaningful discussion, an educational process saying, here's how this decision affects your financial plan. And here's, if you don't do this, how this affects your financial plan, because maybe you're over accumulating wealth and you're going to have lots of regret in life. So it's not a black or white process for decision making. It makes decision making actually your decision making versus influences in your life, who typically, a lot of decisions I see people make really aren't their decisions. And that values exercise, if I were to summarize it in like a sentence, it makes sure every financial choice you have is actually your decision and not someone else's agenda for your life.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. This could be a 2-hour episode on values. So let's move on to the next one.
So the fifth one is just simple. It's, having a financial plan is so important. I think a good financial plan is not just a formula of save X amount in these accounts and be tax efficient. It's really living in that top 10% of the population and making sure you're not someone that's just accumulating for the reason of accumulating, and making sure you're not someone who is not saving enough to then, essentially be on someone else's agenda the rest of your life because you don't have any choices. You have to work. So it's being in that top 10% and understanding there's competitions between college and retirement and vacationing and lifestyle today. And it's not just about, did I get the best returns or did I save in the right places? It's about making choices that you will never be able to change in your life. You only have one shot at this. And so calibrating that is a continual process. So a lot of people ask, why do you pay your financial advisor 1%? It isn't. I think most of what we do is table stakes. Investment management, I believe we're in the top 1%. Tax, advice, estate planning, the list goes on. But if I were to say what's the value proposition, it's saying, I would look at someone and say, it's when our value proposition, if you worked with us your whole life, I want you to look at 90 and look and say, I have no financial regrets. And that does not happen by just putting something on autopilot. We recommend savings on autopilot. That happens through a continual calibration process of making sure that you're not living based upon what your money does or doesn't do. It's making sure your money is designed to help you live your life by design.
Yeah, and I think that's, like you said, the table stakes. Like with artificial intelligence, I mean, a robot's going to be able to do investment management and do some of that basic stuff. But that's like so anyway, advisors that's their value prop is going to be gone, in my opinion. It's my personal opinion. But it's like having those really hard conversations to make sure that, okay, that stuff's, the box is checked, but is it intentionally being used for your lifestyle and what you want? And to exactly what you said, make sure they have no financial regret.
A good financial advisor will eliminate, not completely eliminate, but eliminate as much stress as possible through your life, and then make sure later in life, looking back, that you have as little regret as possible. That's what a good financial advisor and a good financial plan can do for you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. All right, what's next?
So next one is just tracking. So, your best life is not in a spreadsheet. Your best life is outside of the spreadsheet. So there is unhealthy tracking where, we're obsessing over what dollars went out, where it went, and then, spouses arguing, you spent too much on Amazon, or you spent too much on that trip. It just can, so reversing that and realizing that the healthy tracking is typically done in a once a month, once you're on a reverse budget, once your savings are automated. It's tracking your net worth. It's making sure that you're spending on very enjoyable exercise, reviewing your values exercise. So there is a million things to track, but if we track the right, 4 or 5 things, we can eliminate the decision fatigue to have to track the other 1,000. I have a budget review once a year. It's automated. It's that coffee pot. I can't change it. And so, what I track is what I'm saving, what my net worth is, controllable factors, because once I spend money on most purchases that are sometimes stupid, I can't get that back. So
takeaways, net worth and savings are the two big ones I would say are the most important. Anything to add?
And make sure you have goals for, experiences and all your financial plan. I would track your progress towards, college, towards your, maybe tracking even time with your kids would be a good thing to track, not tracking, what you're spending on lattes.
Yeah.
And
I heard this, make instead of $3 decisions, make $300,000 decisions. And what that means is the $3 coffee is not changing your life if you buy that or not. But the $300,000 decision is saving $1,000 a month compounded over, many years.
Yeah, and I would encourage, if you're making $1 million a year, you should be spending $10 on every coffee because guess what? By doing that, someone else is doing all the work, and you add up what your time is worth compared to that, and you're saving probably a couple $100 every coffee you buy.
Yeah.
And so same thing for vacations. Maybe it's flying first class and making it enjoyable. Think about what your time's worth, and when you go through these exercises and prioritize and eliminate all the unnecessary stupid stuff and focus on what you really want. It's incredible to see, what you can do. And a lot of stuff, like nitpicky stuff, we would encourage you to dine out. We would encourage you to spend $10 on every coffee every day because that's going to save your time. And that's a very, valuable non-renewable resource which you need to be focusing on. So
Totally.
tracking so important. So for the decision making, if you're making a big purchase that you have any pressure, make sure you sleep on it overnight, and then just make sure you review how your value system is aligned after the decision is made, whether it's a house, a car, etc. So our 8th tip, we've already mentioned several times, it's around automating everything that's possible. So that'll be everything from reverse budgeting to dollar cost averaging in the market to having a philosophy in place with how you're going to spend and save your bonus. So the 9th thing is just about understanding. So in general, we recommend don't do anything that you don't understand. So Jamison, talk to us about how we've seen some clients' balance sheets that actually are working against them, that all these different investments are pitched, but then it just takes up their time and confuses.
So many layers to unpack here. I think that a lot of financial advisors will create more stress because they don't clearly understand. They may not clearly understand it. That way, then they can't articulate it to a client to get the client to understand. So the client doesn't trust them, but they're just like stressed out. It creates more stress. The client's busy. They're just like, okay, do it. But then the client's thinking like, is this the best thing I should be doing? So there's no trust factor because the advisor is not an expert. That's the first thing. And then the second is sometimes it's easy to do things like, we'll say private equity is a great example with a lot of high net worth people we work with. It turns into like, oh, my best friend says I should do this. And it's like, okay, why? And so if you really just dig deep, it's like, your friend doesn't understand it. You don't understand it. So let's make sure we clearly understand what's going on. And a lot of times when we break that down and here's how this actually works, it becomes a very easy decision. So if you don't have an understanding of it, you're going to be more stressed. That you don't have to be an expert of it. You don't need to know the ins and outs of your portfolio. But having a trusted relationship that you know they at least understand it will eliminate a ton of stress.
Yeah, and if you're a gambler, listen. I mean, a lot of clients that make this, they feel like they like the adrenaline, maybe. So just have some rules in place. So generally, we recommend out of your balance sheet, like have less than 10% of your balance sheet in stuff that you don't understand, such as Bitcoin, such as private equity investments. And then also the second rule of thumb is you should not have more than 10% of your income or your net worth or balance sheet in a concentrated stock, which is typically also the company that your whole financial well-being is based upon, because it's also the company that's paying you, giving you all these restricted stocks. If you follow those rules of thumbs, if you understand the majority of your balance sheet and just understand that you're going to limit your balance sheet to less than 10% of the stuff you don't understand, we realize that's going to happen. But just making sure you have the simplicity and making sure that balance sheet is working for you, not against you time-wise, is super important.
I use this like personally, but like you won't put your money anywhere with something you don't understand. So think if you're a physician and you understand medicine, but you're getting solicited real estate. You don't understand the real estate market. Maybe if you have the time to spend, in real estate and understand it, okay, go do it. But a lot of times that will just eliminate so much decision fatigue on being solicited for stuff that generally you should not be investing in. So couldn't agree more.
No question. All right, so the 10th thing is just around, how to implement this. This doesn't all have to be done at one. I actually just read it from a really good book. Like, I think in human history, like people that juggle, I can juggle actually in my prime 4 balls, like 4. Whatever. And it took a lot of work, but apparently like history, like I think that the record is like 13 balls, like no one has gone above 14. So I think that's such a good analogy in life and in a financial plan. Like you can only do so much. And so making sure that the balls you are juggling, if you're juggling 20, you're not going to do anything really well.
Yeah.
So max 14, delegate relentlessly to people, you trust. But you still have to understand stuff. But just be really careful how you're spending your time and how you juggle, what balls you have in the air.
And that's the same thing with like, back to the beginning of the discussion, a lot of high income earners think they can do everything. It's like you may be able to buy the vacation house, pay for private undergrad, pay for 8 years of college. You may be able to do all of those things. It's like, let's just prioritize what we're going to do now versus later. Same thing with juggling. Like whatever the number is, you can't go above 14. You can't do 14 big financial goals at one time. Let's just intentionality, what's most important, and then create a process to do it.
Absolutely. So, Jamison, thanks so much for joining the FIN-LYT podcast. Again, FIN-LYT, the lit was spelled with a Y, is a catalyst, so financial literacy for all listeners, and we hope that the advice and takeaways here are a catalyst for you to make meaningful change to get your financial plan up and running. Once it's up and running, think about a bowler. It's really hard to get it there, but then you can just keep a pulse on it and keep that ball moving. So if you found this helpful, please rate the podcast and also share it with any friends, colleagues, or family that would find similar value that you did. We look forward to joining you next week. Thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in to our podcast. Hopefully you found this helpful. Really hope this is as beneficial and impactful to as many people across the nation as possible. So hit the follow button. Make sure to rate the podcast, and please share with any friends or family members that would also find this beneficial. Thank you very much.